Hi, I've just spoken to Matt Maltby. The interview is coming up right now. This interview is about his journey from going from being an actor into producing. I've known Matt for maybe 10 years now, worked with him a couple of times, and he's a great guy. Says lots of interesting stuff, especially about the idea of being a producer who used to be an actor, but more inside. So do click to subscribe, and thank you very much for watching. Cool, right, here we go. Hello, Matt Maltby.
Hi, Russell Lucas.
How are you?
Yeah, good man. I'm good. It's very sunny outside, and after this, I'm going to go for a cycle. So I'm like, all is well in my world.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. So you're going to talk to us about leaving acting. Now, in some ways, that's probably not a fair title of this interview because I guess although you've left acting, you still work in the theatre. Now, is it fair to say that you have left acting? Would you say you are now a fully fledged producer of theatre?
Yeah, I'd say so. I definitely say that I'm not an actor in a way that like I got really used to saying that I was an actor for a very long time, and I haven't acted in anything or wanted to act in anything for a couple of years, and I don't see myself having a career as an actor or wanting to act in anything for the immediate future.
Right. Okay. Which we'll get onto a little bit later. So I will have done an introduction video at the beginning of this to introduce people how we met and stuff I know that you've done over the years. But tell us about the type of work that interests you. Now, it could have been stuff that you've done in the past, or the stuff that you've got coming up. Is there a theme within the type of work that you find yourself doing?
So I think in industry terms, kind of delineated in the ways that in the industry likes to think about it, I tend to make new writing. So when I was an actor, I did quite a lot of Shakespeare, but when I have the choice to, and as a producer you get the choice to, I make new writing as often as possible, and kind of most of the time that tends to be writing by people from marginalised communities. I like it to be work that might change the world. And that doesn't have to be particularly politically heavy. I like the work I'm producing to have some sort of kind of socially committed project alongside it. So anything that I work on needs to have the capacity to do that in some way or shape or form.
Did you set out to do that? Was that your original quest?
Not when I started. When I wanted to, not when I started being an actor, definitely. And not when I started producing A Night of New Writing, which was the first thing that I ever produced when I didn't know that I wanted to be a producer. But the first play that I produced that was a play and not just a one-off night was a show called Fabric. And I didn't really know that I wanted to be a producer, but I knew that I wanted to make that show happen. And the play touches on sexual assault and violence against women, and I knew instantly that I wanted to do workshops on violence prevention and workshops on prevention of gendered violence in particular. And like, I think from the very moment that I knew that I wanted to produce a play, I knew that it wasn't enough to just produce a play. I knew that something else needed to happen alongside it, and that's kind of always been the case ever since.
Yeah.
And that's now like a rule rather than that's just something I like to do. The rule is that I can't produce a show without it having some kind of engaged project alongside it.
Right. So some sort of social justice is what interests you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, which is interesting because I get to just tell us about Pint Size. Now, Pint Size was a very successful new writing initiative that you made with your partner. Could you tell us the spirit of that and how it panned out, just to get a bit more background into your quest?
So that was just to start with. That was my friend saying to me, "I'd like to produce a night of new writing because I haven't been to new writing that really fulfills what I want from an evening out. Will you produce it with me?" And I think, like many of the ways that I got into producing, the reason I did it was because I hadn't seen someone make the thing that I wanted to make. So I went, okay, well, let's try and make that. And I thought it wouldn't be too much work. And that fell me down a bit of a rabbit hole. So it started as just a little night of new writing. We got 4 people we knew to write pieces, and we got musicians to write tracks about each of the pieces that would link them so that you weren't like just watching people move chairs around in between the pieces. And then that grew exponentially, really, over a couple of years until it became a week-long annual festival. But there came a point in about 2016, which is around about the time that I started to produce actual shows, where we sat around and went, what are we for? Why do we exist? What's the purpose of this? Because it had started as something that we all do for fun, and I think there are so many of those new writing nights, many of which have really brilliant and beautiful purposes, but many of which just seem to exist because. And we decided that we existed in order to help reshape the grassroots and make them more equitable, and give people who weren't being given the chance to showcase and platform their voice that opportunity, and to create further opportunities for them throughout the industry. So we started to do things like anyone who sends a play into Pint Sized who comes from a working class background, or who is a person of colour, or who is disabled, and who is LGBTQIA plus, and there are a couple of other qualifications I think that I've forgotten, automatically gets free feedback and some degree of support or mentoring from then on, which was just an attempt to try and shift the balance of power slightly. And that was kind of how I got into producing, really, and therefore those rules have stood me in quite good stead when producing bigger shows.
Yeah, I think what I liked when I came to, I think I came to 2 Pint Size evenings, was that they were an event in themselves. They weren't just an event with 5 pieces of new writing, and the whole thing was an experience, which is what I liked. That felt like a community event. It felt like just one piece of theatre that encapsulated 5 pieces of mini theatre. Does that make sense?
Well, that was the musicians, and we were really lucky to have some astonishingly talented musicians who wrote those linking parts, and they would always come out and they would do the opening song, which was kind of like, welcome to Pint Sized, well, we hope you have a nice time, here are the house rules, don't forget that you've got 50p off your first drink at the bar. And they really became the people who tied it together. And it was actually one of the musicians in the very first Pint Sized is one of the reasons that I'm a producer, for reasons that we will get into later on. But they all have very, they've been critical to Pint Sized existing, and therefore to me being a producer. And we were really lucky to have them.
So let's talk about that, about you going to produce, because I mean, I've known you probably for 8 years, something like that, if not more. And when I found out that you were producing full time, I went, oh yeah. I kind of went, yeah, I understand that. So what was that? Where was that moment for you when you understood that about yourself, or was it always in the background? Did you naturally, say, for want of a better word, abandon your acting ambition and go to producing? What was the moment? What was the trigger for you? So
I've always been someone who likes organising stuff. Like, whenever I and my friends were playing game football on Saturday, it would be me who rang round everybody and got them all to come round. And I was that kind of actor as well. I think probably to a bit of an annoying degree sometimes, where in big casts, I would be the person who made sure everyone had turned up for the warm up and made sure we all had our props, particularly when you start and you maybe don't have a stage management team. And it's up to the actors to kind of self-organise. And I did that loads at drama school. And I always thought that I would act for a good long time, but that I would eventually become a director. I thought that directors were the people who organised. And also I enjoyed directing. I did some of it at university, and I was quite into it. Actually, the longer my career has gone on, the more obvious it's been to me that in many ways directors are the opposite of people who organise. And that is in many ways a real joy. But so I always thought I'd be a director. But I thought I'd be an actor for quite a long time. I used to think about footballers who were footballers for 20 years and then use all that experience of understanding the game to go on and become managers. And I thought I would. And I also really loved acting, and I needed to prove to myself that I could act and I could make a success of that, because I was never a prodigiously talented actor. I was always quite good, and there were certain times where I was very good, and there were certain times where I was not so good. And so I kind of needed to prove to myself, and I think to my family and I think to all of my peers that like this was something that I could achieve. And so I started to work reasonably well as an actor without kind of pulling up massive trees, but there was a good couple of years of like solid and quite consistent work. But at the same time as that was happening, Pint Sized had started, and Pint Sized was doing better than my acting career. Pint Sized was certainly getting a lot more attention than my acting career was, and it became obvious to me really early that like I was never going to be one of the best actors in the country, say, but that I could be quite a good producer and I could have a pretty successful producing career. But I was always holding back, going, oh, but I don't want to. There's something that I've got left to prove. Then I did a big tour for 6 months as an actor, where we cycled up and down the country for the first 3 months. We cycled like about 40 miles a day with about 50 kilos on our bikes, and cycled from venue to venue performing each day. And that summer was the summer of Brexit. So it was summer of the Brexit vote, and we were literally seeing the whole country. And it was astonishing watching this incredibly divided nation where like most nights people would just come to the show and have a really nice time and that no one was particularly divided. But being in the Midlands for the day of the vote and being very much in a part of the country that voted very heavily to leave, and I felt very strongly that that was the wrong decision. And I remember cycling up a hill outside Coventry, thinking about the impact that I felt this vote was going to have on us, and crying and going, what am I doing? Like I'm cycling around every day, doing a kind of quite light-hearted comedy. What's the impact that I'm having on the world? Like, why is this the way that I've chosen to spend my energy? And then I had a really good time on the tour, so I carried on for a little bit, and someone offered me a really good job as an actor straight after the tour. So I thought, well, I'll go and do that. But then, when Trump was elected, my dad was quite ill that night, and got rushed into hospital. And it turned out he was completely fine, but it looked for a second like it was something very serious. And so I was starting to think about, it made me think a little bit about life and mortality and kind of how long we all have and what the purpose of what we're here for is. And then a friend of mine, who was one of the musicians in the very first Pint Sized, passed away in her mid-20s that autumn. And it was really shocking. I remember getting a phone call about it and just being totally knocked for six. And I spent that autumn watching the world fall apart, thinking about death and about how long I had and what impact I was going to have, and going, what am I for? Which was about the same time we decided to ask, what's Pint Sized for? And I decided that what I was for was to make as big a positive impact in as many people's lives as possible while having as good as possible a time. Which is a sort of relatively cod and bland way of looking at what a life is for, but it's what I decided. And I thought, as an actor, I'm not getting a say really in what my impact on the world is. Yeah. I take the job that I'm offered, and I'm not a good enough actor or a successful enough actor to be being offered loads and loads of jobs, so I just pick and choose the one that I think has the greatest social impact. I take the role that is given to me, and as a result, that could be in a really light-hearted comedy. It could be in a play with politics I don't really believe in. It could be anything. It could be something that's really socially invested, where we do loads of workshops and we're kind of getting deep into the roots of a community. Or I could be performing for the rest of my life to upper middle class white people, like my parents, who are lovely, but I don't think that they fundamentally need more theatre. I don't think that that's the most urgent use of my time. And then that last job that I did after the tour, I just got a bit bored. We were performing over Christmas. We did loads of shows. I couldn't face a life repeating the same thing over and over again. Yeah. And it was the best performance I ever gave. It was like I was categorically, definitely really good in it. And my parents came and saw it, and they thought I was great. And I remember sitting at dinner with them all after it and just being like, oh, they definitely think I'm really good at this. And in that one moment, actually, one of the needs had gone. And I stopped needing to prove to my parents that I was a really good actor because everyone had accepted it. And what it turned out, like shamefully, is that without the desperate need to prove myself, particularly to my family, I wasn't that motivated by being an actor. It turned out that that had been one of the big things that had been driving me the whole time. And as soon as that went away, I went, I'm not sure I can do this.
Okay.
So someone asked me if I'd produce a play, and I produced it. And that was that.
That's interesting, because I think I've definitely had moments in my life very similar to what you said. In fact, that something happens within your life, and then you do take a moment to go, okay, what am I doing, and where am I going, and what's my motivation behind this? Why am I doing this? Am I happy in doing it? I've definitely felt those moments actually propel me, and also focus or refocus my choices, because you start to realize the vibration of time behind everything that you're doing, and you think, right, what am I going to do? What am I going to do, etc. So let's just so let's dig a bit deeper here. So on the surface, I understand why. I mean, from what you just said, it seems that you almost became a producer, or instinctively sought out the role of being a producer for more for opportunities to contribute, or
Yeah.
create your own opportunities.
I think of lots of life, hopefully, and this is like a tremendously virtuous thing to say, and I probably don't hold by this all the time, but lots of life is about service, really, and who you can serve and what you can serve. And we all exist in service of something that's so much bigger than ourselves. Like, I think one of the problems with people who live in cities is that they don't get to see the stars very often, and you don't get to reflect on how absolutely tiny we all are. And so opportunities to serve small groups of people that you might be working with. I think, like, I often wasn't working in a culture that served me as an actor. And I often wasn't working in a company that I thought was working as well as it could have done, whether that's just practically or kind of ethically or whatever it is. So opportunities to serve my colleagues, opportunities to, I guess, serve the wider industry, and opportunities to serve communities whose stories aren't being told, or who are not having stories told to them or for them. Opportunities to do that and to feel like I was doing something that had meaning. I'm a bit of a meaning junkie. And that's not necessarily a good or a virtuous thing. It's just another thing that people are seeking. But that is, I think, what I'm running after a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think your journey kind of chimes with mine in some ways, because I definitely started as an actor and then realized that I could get things done quicker if I directed as well. And producing came later on. I love directing, don't get me wrong, I adore it. I didn't choose it as an add-on. I realized I was both after a while. It was my lecturer who said it to me. She said, you're also a director, possibly a teacher. And she was right. It turned out that way for me. And so let me ask you the question then. So do you think you have more power as a producer? You do.
I mean, I cannot tell you how much. And like, I felt as an actor often, like, in a conversation, whether that's like with an industry stakeholder, let's say just someone you meet at a party who happens to work in the industry, or in an audition, there's so much proving yourself that needs to be done as an actor. You're always on the back foot in any conversation. You're always one of many, many people. You're always an option for someone. And as a producer, no, I didn't set out for this at all, but you find it immediately. You just instantly have respect in kind of any conversation that's not afforded to you as an actor. And actually, it's still not particularly healthy, because you're always on a slant. You're just at the top of the slant instead of the bottom. It's relatively rare, actually, that in theatre, particularly when you're starting out, that people are just simply talking to each other on a level. But I definitely felt like I was automatically afforded respect and listened to as soon as I said that I was a producer, in a way that I kind of wasn't as an actor. And as a producer, I get to choose my projects. Like I always have a choice. If most producers produced all of the shows that they were offered, they would be producing at kind of 10 times their own capacity. I get to choose how we make a show. There's enormous power in the moment that you make a budget, and a good producer, I think, does that with a director, and the two of you work together to understand, starting with the story and the director's interpretation of it, what kind of budget you need, rather than going, here's your budget, work within it, which is how some producers can work. But the moment where you do that really defines a huge amount of the project. And you make other like massive project defining choices: who you're going to sell the tickets to, what price the tickets are going to be, what the marketing images are going to be, what kind of social justice project are you going to run alongside it. All of these are decisions that like an actor often doesn't even know are happening. I think the thing about an actor is you often don't even know how little power you have, because you're quite rightly focusing on the minutiae. An actor's job is to focus on the very, very smallest point of focus, and that's what makes them magicians and wizards. And I think one of my problems as an actor was that I was unable to get myself out of the bigger picture, not just the wider picture of the project, but I would be thinking on stage, how does this look, or how's the audience feeling, or like, oh god, like that person over there has dropped something, I should go and pick it up at some point. And I was never one of those actors who can just transmogrify themselves into a moment and hold in the smallness of something.
I think I agree. I think actually it's just somebody who's directed you as well. You're one of these actors that's omnipresent. You do have that. You have the idea of something dropping on the floor, and you realize that even though you're doing your huge monologue, that must be removed. It's something that I'd spot in myself, and it's interesting that you started to straddle, producer and actor.
Yeah, and I think it was a failing as an actor. And one of the things I like about the best actors I know aren't that interested in power. Like, when I talk about actors not having lots of power until you're incredibly successful and then you kind of call all of the shots, that can sound like I'm sort of denigrating actors in some way, but actually I think it's another interesting failing of mine that like I am interested in power. I like power, and I think I like to have control over circumstances. I like to control a culture. I like to make the decisions, even if at the moment the decisions are incredibly hard. I like to be the person who's making those calls, and that's another reason why I wouldn't have lasted very long as an actor.
Yeah, and I think also I would still call you a theatre maker, because you've been an actor, and so you are now in the producer camp. And the theatre maker really is kind of it's really a person, I think, who is a master of mostly all the skills required to make theatre, I think. And so it's interesting that you're coming from the actor's point of view, which leads to my next question. Do you think your time as an actor serves your role now?
Does it massively?
A different kind of, do you feel it gives you an insight? Does it give you a different language if you compare yourself to people who've been producers for all of their career, or what?
Yeah, I think my granddad used to run a factory, and he was so proud of the fact that he could do every job on the factory floor. Like, if someone got ill, he would be able to fill in for them. And I don't think that you need to be able to do that. I don't think that's really what like leading a project looks like. But it meant that he knew the challenges that each of his employees were going through, and that if someone said, look, I need a replacement for this because it's got worn down and it means I'm going a lot less quickly than I should be, he knew what that meant, and he knew emotionally what that meant to the person. And I feel like I know what actors at least are going through. And if you've been in a rehearsal room, you know what most people in the rehearsal room are going through. And I think that helps me look after people much better. It helps me know the questions that need to be asked of them to find out what they need to be supported. And also, I think I've always started with the how do we get this made? Like, I became a producer because there were just shows that I kind of wanted to get on. I didn't come wanting to be particularly great at business or to make lots of profit, for instance. And I think, you know, most people who work in theatre are not that interested in profit because they'd be working in something else. But it means that I'm always show centered. And I think that gives me a particular type of value. It means that I'm not the right producer for other projects, but for some projects in particular, where like I'm really, really interested in what happens in the rehearsal room and the minutiae of how we can support that and how we can make it better. And it also means that there are some skill sets that I developed as an actor, like text work. So I'm a pretty decent dramaturg, I think, and I tend to get involved early-ish in that bit of the process. So it gives me a lot of empathy, I think, for people, but it also gives me little bits of skills that I've held on to. And like you and I have talked before about, we're both the kind of people who made the kind of theatre which is a bit bodged together a lot of the time, which is held together with gaffer tape and bits of wire. And I'm still the kind of producer who like sweeps, is the last person there at tech, sweeping up and taking the bins out. And if a prop breaks and no one else can go in, I like go in and do my best to fix it. Like, all of those are skills that I think you get being an actor in fringe theatre, really, and that's where I started.
Yeah, I think most of the time I think that I became a director because I worked with bad directors. So I wanted to take control, and knowing what I know now at my age, I was definitely correct in that. I really did work with some bad directors. But then as the years have gone on, sometimes I've worked with a director who's never acted, and they're phenomenal. And so I think it displays that there are just different degrees of the term producer, term director, etc. And it's a fascinating one. We'll never know the answer, I guess, but it's horses for courses, isn't it? And what is need right now for that production?
Yeah, well, I think a different producer from me with totally different experience might have totally different skills, or might have totally the same skills. And yeah, it's very much that horses for courses thing. And I think when I was an actor, thought that I worked for some bad producers, or like I think was in shows and was like, oh, I'd be doing this so differently. And in some cases, yes, I think I've done better than some of those producers at some of those things. But actually, looking back, just realised it's really hard, and that probably they were brilliant, and that they were doing a much better job than me at most of those factors. And I definitely came up as someone who's like, I want to do this because I've never seen anyone do it really well. And it turns out that, like, I'm sure that actors who work on shows that I produce have exactly that same thought. And in 10 years' time, we'll be like, God, I was in this show that like Matt Maltby produced, and it was the one that made me need to become a producer because like I needed to fix what he'd done wrong. It's all growing, isn't it? And we're all still relatively early in what we're doing.
So just as a last thought, because I think there's probably 2 minutes, do you miss acting?
No, not really. I had a moment a couple of weeks ago where I was like performing something. I think I was just drunk and singing with my housemates, and I was like, oh, I slightly miss this moment of real presence and attention at the same time. Like the moment where I'm really invested in something and there's a truth to what I'm making and people are looking at me, great. But I don't miss the life of being an actor at all. I don't miss the business of it. And I don't miss it in a sustained enough way to ever consider going back to it. But like sometimes it's quite nice to make a speech and be funny. So like I like giving a speech at a wedding, and that scratches the itch for a bit.
Yeah. Everybody look at me. Cool. Fabulous. Yeah. That's it. Thank you, Matt Maltby, for your thoughts.
Thank you, Russell Lucas. That was a joy. I really enjoyed that.